My name is Emma Wilson. I'm 28 years old, and I thought I understood my place in my family. That phone call on Thanksgiving Day changed everything. I live in Portland, Oregon, where I work as a real estate investment consultant. I know that sounds fancy, but basically, I help people buy, fix up, and flip properties for profit. I'm good at it too, really good. I make about $185,000 a year, plus bonuses when deals go well. I drive a Mercedes E-Class that I bought with cash last year, and I own a downtown condo worth about $500,000. At 28, I've built something I'm genuinely proud of. But none of that has ever seemed to matter to my mother, Rebecca Wilson. She's 58, works as a school secretary in Salem, and has spent my entire life making it clear that my older brother Kyle is the golden child. Kyle's 31, works construction, lives paycheck to paycheck, and can do no wrong in her eyes. Meanwhile, every success I've had gets dismissed as showing off or getting too big for my britches. Growing up, I was always the family disappointment. Too ambitious, too driven, too unwilling to stay in my lane. When my father died when I was 12, Mom leaned even harder into Kyle, and I became the afterthought who was too much trouble. When my mother screamed, "You're a complete failure," into the phone that Thursday afternoon, she had no idea I was sitting in my Mercedes outside her childhood home, having just signed the purchase agreement for $950,000. She had no idea what was coming next. Before I dive into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button for more stories about proving the doubters wrong. Let me back up and tell you how I got to that moment, sitting outside that house with a signed purchase agreement, because the story really starts with understanding just how far I'd come despite my family's complete lack of support. My condo in downtown Portland is on the 15th floor of this sleek glass building in the Pearl District. Floor-to-ceiling windows, granite countertops, a view of Mount Hood on clear days. It's worth $480,000, and I bought it 2 years ago with a cash down payment of $150,000. Every morning when I wake up and see that view, I remember being told by my mother that renting was fine for your father and me when I mentioned wanting to buy my first place. My work isn't just a job, it's what I'm genuinely passionate about. I specialize in acquiring distressed properties, the ones that most people walk away from because they look like money pits. I see potential where others see problems. Last year alone, I flipped 6 properties, each one netting between $80,000 and $200,000 in profit. My total portfolio is worth $2.3 million now, and that's not counting my primary residence or my business assets. I drive that Mercedes E-Class I mentioned. It's pearl white with cream leather interior, and yes, I bought it because I wanted to prove something. Maybe that was petty, but when you grow up being told you need to stay realistic about your dreams, there's something satisfying about pulling into your childhood neighborhood in a car that costs more than most people make in a year. My typical day starts at 6 a.m. with coffee and market reports. I'm usually dressed in business attire that actually fits properly. Tailored blazers, designer shoes, jewelry that isn't from the clearance rack. I travel frequently for work, sometimes to Seattle or San Francisco to look at investment opportunities, sometimes to conferences where I'm actually invited to speak about real estate investment strategies. I have a housekeeper who comes twice a week. I eat at restaurants where the entrees cost $35, and I genuinely enjoy the life I've built. But none of this started easy. I grew up in Salem, Oregon, in a 1,200 square foot house that my parents bought in 1987 for $78,000. We weren't poor, exactly, but we were definitely working class. My dad, Michael, worked as a shift supervisor at a paper mill, and my mom worked part-time at the elementary school office. Money was always tight, but we got by. Everything changed when I was 12. Dad had a heart attack at work on a Tuesday morning in October. He was 44 years old, and he died before the ambulance even got him to the hospital. Mom was 42, suddenly a widow with 2 kids and a mortgage she could barely afford on her part-time salary. That's when Kyle became the golden child, though honestly, the favoritism had started long before Dad died. Kyle was 3 years older than me, and from the time I could walk, it was clear that he was the one who mattered. He was good at sports, which Dad loved. He was mechanically inclined, which impressed everyone. He had this easygoing personality that made adults smile and say things like, "What a great kid." I, on the other hand, was intense. That was the word they always used. I read too much, asked too many questions, had too many opinions about things. When I brought home straight A's, the response was always, "That's nice, honey," and then immediate attention back to whatever Kyle was doing. When Kyle brought home C's and B's, there were celebrations about how hard he was trying. After Dad died, this dynamic got even worse. Mom was overwhelmed, grieving, and terrified about money. Kyle stepped up in ways that a 15-year-old probably shouldn't have had to. He got a part-time job at a garage, helped with yard work, basically became the man of the house. And I understood why Mom was grateful for that. What I didn't understand was why my contributions seemed to count for nothing. I was 12, but I started babysitting neighborhood kids to bring in money. I did all the housework that Kyle was too busy for. I maintained a 4.0 GPA while Kyle's grades slipped because he was working. But every conversation was about how wonderful Kyle was, how responsible, how dependable. The pattern continued through high school. I was valedictorian of my graduating class, which should have been a proud moment for any parent. I worked for months on my speech, talking about resilience and building your own path forward. When I finished speaking and walked off the stage, the first thing my mother said to me was, "That was a bit long, don't you think?" People looked restless. Kyle graduated 2 years before me with a 2.8 GPA and immediately started work in construction with one of his friend's dads. Mom constantly praised him for being practical and knowing what he wanted. When I told her I planned to go to college and major in business, she said I was getting ahead of myself and needed to be more realistic about what we could afford. So I made it work myself. I worked 3 jobs through college, mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons tutoring other students, weekends waitressing at a chain restaurant. I lived in the cheapest dorm available, bought my textbooks used, and ate a lot of ramen noodles. I graduated with a double major in real estate and finance, with a 3.9 GPA and only $31,000 in student loans. The day I graduated, Mom spent the entire ceremony and celebration dinner talking about Kyle's new girlfriend, Jessica, and how excited she was that they might get engaged soon. When people congratulated me on my academic achievement, Mom would smile politely and then immediately redirect the conversation to Kyle's latest construction project or how well he was doing at work. I got my real estate license 6 months after graduation and started working for a small firm in Portland. I was hungry, motivated, and willing to work with clients that other agents didn't want to deal with. First-time buyers with complicated finances, investors looking for unusual properties, people selling houses in rough condition. Within 2 years, I was consistently one of the top earners at my firm. When I told Mom I was getting into real estate investment myself, that I'd found a duplex I could buy, live in one side, and rent out the other, her response was, "Just don't turn into one of those pushy salespeople. Your father always said real estate agents were just legalized con artists." I bought that duplex anyway. It was my first property, and I was 23 years old. The mortgage payment was actually less than what I'd been paying in rent, and the rental income from the other unit covered about 60% of the payment. It was a smart financial move, and I was proud of myself for making it happen. When I called to tell Mom about closing on the house, she said, "Don't get too big for your britches, Emma. Pride comes before the fall." Meanwhile, Kyle was getting praised for every small thing he did. When he got a promotion to crew chief, Mom called everyone she knew to brag about it. When he bought a used pickup truck, financed at 18% interest because his credit was terrible, she posted photos on Facebook about how proud she was of his new truck. 2 years later, Kyle decided he wanted to start his own construction business. He had no business experience, no savings, and no real plan, but he'd convinced himself he could make it work. Mom was immediately supportive, offering to co-sign loans, helping him research business licenses, constantly talking about Kyle's big dreams. The business failed within 8 months. Kyle lost about $25,000, most of it borrowed money that Mom had helped him get. When he came home broke and defeated, Mom's response was to welcome him back with open arms, help him find a new job, and never once say, "I told you so," or suggest that maybe he should have been more realistic. During those same 2 years, I had bought and successfully flipped 3 properties, each one requiring months of careful planning, budgeting, and project management. I was making more money than I'd ever imagined possible, building a real business and proving that my unrealistic dreams were actually well within reach. Mom's response to my success was to constantly warn me about market crashes, remind me that what goes up must come down, and suggest that I was getting lucky rather than actually being skilled at what I did. When I bought my condo, the one I live in now, I called her excitedly to share the news. I just closed on a beautiful downtown property, something I dreamed about since college. Her response was, "I don't understand why you need all that space. Renting was fine for your father and me. Seems like you're just showing off." That comment stung more than most because it wasn't just dismissive, it was accusatory. Like I was buying the condo to make her feel bad about her choices, rather than because I'd worked hard and earned the right to live somewhere beautiful. Kyle, meanwhile, was still living paycheck to paycheck, still getting into financial trouble that Mom would help him out of, still being praised for every tiny step forward. When he started dating his current girlfriend, Sarah, Mom immediately embraced her like a daughter. When I was briefly engaged to a guy named Marcus 2 years ago, a relationship that ended amicably when we realized we wanted different things, Mom barely acknowledged it and seemed almost relieved when we broke up. The pattern was always the same. Kyle's struggles were temporary setbacks that deserved sympathy and support. Kyle's successes were major achievements worthy of celebration. My struggles, the years of working multiple jobs, the stress of building a business, the challenges of navigating a male-dominated industry, were just whining. My successes were either luck, showing off, or something to be worried about rather than celebrated. And through it all, I kept showing up. I came to every family dinner, remembered every birthday, brought expensive wine and thoughtful gifts. I offered to help when Kyle was struggling financially, offers that were always declined because we don't want you to think we're taking advantage. I bit my tongue when Mom would spend entire visits talking about Kyle's life while barely asking about mine. I told myself it was just Mom's way, that she didn't mean to be hurtful, that family was family regardless of how dysfunctional the dynamics were. I told myself that eventually she'd come around, that she'd see how hard I'd worked and be proud of what I'd accomplished. But by Thanksgiving of 2023, I was starting to realize that no amount of success was ever going to be enough. No matter how much money I made, how many properties I owned, how stable and secure my life became, I was always going to be the daughter who was too big for her britches, who needed to be brought down a peg, who couldn't be trusted with too much praise or support. That realization was sitting heavy in my chest as I drove to Kyle's apartment that Thanksgiving day. I had no idea that this would be the day everything finally came to a head, or that by the end of it, I'd be making the biggest real estate deal of my career for reasons that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with finally standing up for myself. To understand what happened that Thanksgiving, you need to know about the one thing that mattered to my mother more than anything else in the world, 1247 Maple Street. This house isn't just any property. It's been in our family for 3 generations. My great-grandmother bought it in 1923, a beautiful craftsman bungalow in what's now the historic Laurelhurst neighborhood of Portland. Back then, Laurelhurst was a middle-class area where teachers and shop owners could afford to buy homes. Today, it's one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the city, where houses regularly sell for over $1 million. My mother, Rebecca, lived in that house from the day she was born until she married my father at 18. She talks about it like other people talk about paradise. The creaky hardwood floors, the built-in bookshelves, the arched doorways, the garden where her mother taught her to grow roses. Every room holds some precious memory. Learning to cook in the kitchen with the original 1920s cabinets, reading in the window seat of the front bedroom, playing piano in the living room where the afternoon light streams through stained glass windows. When my grandmother died in 2019, she left the house to Mom. At 58, Mom was finally back in possession of what she'd always considered her real home. The problem was she couldn't afford to live there. The property taxes alone were $8,000 a year, and the house needed significant maintenance that her school secretary's salary couldn't cover. So she found tenants, Harold and Margaret Chin, a sweet, elderly couple who'd been renting the place for 4 years now. Mom charges them $1,800 a month, which sounds reasonable until you realize that comparable houses in Laurelhurst rent for $3,500 to $4,000. When I pointed this out to her once, she got defensive. "I don't want to be greedy," she said. "They're good people, and they take care of the place." What she really meant was that charging market rate would make her feel like a landlord, and landlords were somehow beneath the moral standards she'd set for herself. Every Saturday, Mom drives the 45 minutes from Salem to Portland to check on things. She brings her gardening gloves and spends hours maintaining the rose garden, trimming the hedges, making sure the house looks exactly the way her mother kept it. She has keys to the place and often goes inside to dust the antique furniture that Harold and Margaret are too polite to mention they don't really like. The house is like a shrine to Mom. She's kept every family photo, every piece of her mother's china, every doily and embroidered pillow. She knows which floorboards creak and which windows stick. She can tell you stories about every scratch on the hardwood floors and every stain on the Persian rug in the living room. This obsession with the house might be sweet if it weren't for how it highlighted the stark differences in how Mom treated Kyle versus me. Because while she was preserving every detail of her family's past, she was completely blind to the family she actually had in the present. Take Kyle's divorce last year. His marriage to Jennifer lasted exactly 18 months, and it ended badly. Jennifer filed for divorce claiming Kyle had a drinking problem and couldn't hold down steady employment. Kyle needed a lawyer, and lawyers cost money, specifically $12,000 that he didn't have. Mom took out a loan against her car to pay Kyle's attorney fees. She didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions about whether Kyle was really the victim he claimed to be, didn't suggest that maybe he should face the consequences of his own choices. She just wrote the check and told him everything would work out fine. 3 months later, Kyle got a DUI. He'd been out drinking with friends, tried to drive home, and got pulled over 6 blocks from his apartment. The bail was $2,500, the fines were another $3,800, and he needed a lawyer again to try to keep his driver's license. Once again, Mom stepped in. She took out another loan, this time against her retirement account, and covered all of Kyle's expenses. When Kyle needed help, Mom moved mountains. When I needed help, specifically, when I was trying to buy my first investment property and asked if she'd co-sign a loan to help me get better financing terms, her response was, "You're on your own, Emma. You wanted to be independent, so be independent." I wasn't asking for money. I was asking for her signature on a document that would save me about $30,000 in interest over the life of the loan. I had the down payment, I had steady income, and the rental property would have generated positive cash flow from day one. It was a smart financial decision that would have cost her nothing and helped me significantly. But because it was me asking, it was somehow inappropriate. Kyle's disasters deserved family support. My opportunities were things I should handle alone. This pattern played out constantly at family dinners. Every conversation centered around Kyle's problems and needs. His job stress, his relationship drama, his financial struggles, his health concerns. Mom would listen intently, offer advice, and look for ways to help. When Kyle got promoted to crew chief, Mom called everyone she knew to share the good news. When Kyle started dating Sarah, Mom immediately invited her to every family gathering and started talking about wedding plans. My successes, when they were mentioned at all, were treated like potential disasters waiting to happen. When I bought my second investment property last year, a beautiful 1940s house in the Belmont district that I renovated and sold for a $180,000 profit, Mom's response was, "You're getting in over your head, just like your father did." My father, for the record, never invested in real estate. He worked at the paper mill his entire career and died with $14,000 in savings. But somehow, in Mom's mind, my success was inevitably leading to the same fate. The warnings were constant. When Portland Business Journal featured me in their 30 Under 30, list this past spring, an honor that represented years of hard work and professional recognition. Mom's response was, "Don't let it go to your head, Emma. Pride comes before the fall." When colleagues or family friends would compliment my achievements in front of Mom, she'd smile politely and then redirect the conversation. "Emma's always been stubborn," she'd say, as if my determination was a character flaw rather than the reason for my success. "She gets an idea in her head and just won't let it go." My income was always described as probably temporary, as if real estate investment was some kind of pyramid scheme rather than a legitimate business. When I mentioned hitting major financial milestones, like when my portfolio first topped $2 million, Mom would respond with warnings about market crashes and remind me that what goes up must come down. The most frustrating part was how she'd reject any attempt I made to help financially. When I offered to pay for the roof repairs her house needed, repairs that were estimated at $8,000 and that she was putting off because she couldn't afford them, she got offended. "I raised you to be humble, not flashy," she said. "We don't need your charity." But it wasn't charity. I was genuinely trying to help, and I could easily afford it. But accepting help from me would mean acknowledging that I had actually been successful, and that seemed to be something Mom couldn't do. Meanwhile, Kyle continued to live paycheck to paycheck, continued to make poor financial decisions, and continued to receive unwavering support for every struggle and celebration for every minor achievement. When he started dating Sarah, Mom immediately embraced her and started talking about grandchildren. When I was engaged to Marcus, Mom barely acknowledged it and seemed relieved when we broke up. The crisis that would change everything started in early October 2023, with a phone call that Mom clearly didn't want to make. "Emma," she said, her voice tight with stress, "I need to tell you something about the house." I was in my office, reviewing contracts for a new flip in the Hawthorne district, but something in her tone made me push the paperwork aside and give her my full attention. Harold and Margaret Wilson, the elderly couple who'd been renting Grandma's house for 4 years, had decided to move to assisted living. Margaret's dementia was getting worse, and Harold couldn't take care of both her and the big house anymore. They were giving Mom 60 days notice, which meant by December 1st, she'd need new tenants. "I'm sure you'll find someone," I said, though even as I said it, I was already thinking about the challenges she'd face. The house hadn't been significantly updated since the 1980s. The electrical system was ancient, the plumbing was unreliable, and the roof had been patched so many times it looked like a quilt. "It's not that simple," Mom said, and I could hear her starting to cry. "Harold told me about some problems they've been dealing with that they didn't want to bother me about. The basement flooded twice last winter. The upstairs bathroom has a leak that's damaged the ceiling below. And the electrical. Emma, Harold said they've been afraid to use the washer and dryer at the same time because it trips the breaker." As she talked, I was already pulling up real estate listings for Laurelhurst on my computer. Houses in that neighborhood were selling for $850,000 to $1.2 million, even ones that needed work. But those were houses being sold by people who understood their value and were willing to invest in bringing them up to modern standards. "Have you gotten estimates for the repairs?" I asked. "Kyle's going to help me with that," she said quickly. "He knows contractors." I bit my tongue. Kyle knew construction workers, not contractors. There's a difference between guys who can frame a house and licensed professionals who understand electrical codes and permit requirements for historic properties. "Mom, let me help with this," I said carefully. "I deal with property renovations all the time. I know contractors, I understand the permit process, I can get you accurate estimates and reliable work." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I thought we'd been disconnected. "You think you know everything because you wear fancy clothes now," she finally said. "This is my family home, Emma. It's not some investment property for you to flip." "I'm not trying to flip it," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "I'm trying to help you save it. Mom, if you don't address these issues properly, you could lose tenants, or worse, the city could condemn the property." "Don't be so dramatic," she snapped. "Kyle will help me figure it out." Over the next 2 weeks, Kyle did indeed try to help. I heard about his efforts through a series of increasingly panicked phone calls from Mom. His contractor friends gave estimates that ranged from wildly optimistic to absolutely insane. One guy told her she could fix the electrical problems for $3,000, which told me immediately that he wasn't licensed and had no idea what he was looking at. Another suggested she could patch the roof for another few years instead of replacing it. The legitimate contractors Kyle contacted, the ones who actually understood what they were looking at, gave estimates that ranged from $120,000 to $180,000. For a woman whose entire savings account held about $23,000, this might as well have been $1 million. I called her again in early November. "Mom, please let me help. I can loan you the money for the repairs at 0% interest. You can pay me back from the rental income over time." "I don't want to owe you anything," she said coldly. "You'd just lord it over me, like you do with everything else." "When have I ever lorded anything over you?" I asked, genuinely confused. "You show up to family dinners in clothes that cost more than I make in a month. You drive a car that's worth more than some people's houses. Everything about the way you live is designed to make the rest of us feel small." I sat in my office, looking out at the Portland skyline, trying to process what she'd just said. I worked hard for everything I had. I'd never once made a comment about her financial situation or suggested that she should live differently. If anything, I'd spent years walking on eggshells, trying not to make her feel bad about the differences in our circumstances. "I don't want to make you feel small," I said quietly. "I just want to help." "Then let Kyle handle it," she said. "At least Kyle isn't trying to take advantage of family." Take advantage? I was offering to loan her money at 0% interest to save her family home. A bank would charge her 8 to 12% if she could even qualify for a loan, which she probably couldn't given her income and credit situation. But this was the pattern with Mom. Kyle's failures were always someone else's fault, and Kyle's offers to help were always pure-hearted. My successes were somehow suspect, and my offers to help always had ulterior motives. I let it go because I always let it go. I told myself that Mom was stressed and scared about the house, and that she'd come around when she realized Kyle couldn't actually solve this problem. Then came November 20th, 3 days before Thanksgiving. I was at home, cooking dinner and catching up on emails, when my phone rang. It was Mom, and she was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "Emma, I don't know what to do," she managed to get out between sobs. "There was a fire. Not a big fire, but the basement, the electrical." It took me 20 minutes to get the whole story. Harold had been doing laundry that morning when he heard a popping sound from the electrical panel. He'd gone downstairs to check and found scorch marks on the wall around the breaker box, along with the smell of burning plastic. The fire department had come, declared the electrical system unsafe, and red-tagged the house. A red tag meant no one could live there until the electrical system was completely replaced. Harold and Margaret had moved into their new assisted living facility that afternoon, 3 weeks earlier than planned. Mom was looking at an empty house that couldn't legally be occupied, in a neighborhood where comparable properties were renting for $3,500 a month. The electrician said it'll cost $35,000 just to bring the electrical up to code, she said. And that's before we even talk about the roof or the plumbing or anything else. The insurance won't cover it because they're saying it's deferred maintenance, not an accident. "Mom," I said carefully, "let me come look at the house. Let me bring my contractor and get you a real assessment of what needs to be done." "I can't afford a real assessment," she said. "I can't afford any of this." "You don't have to afford it. I'll pay for the assessment, and we'll figure out the rest together." "No," she said firmly. "I've already talked to Kyle. He has a plan." Kyle's plan, it turned out, was to sell the house to a house-flipping company. One of his construction buddies had a connection with a company called Quick Cash Properties, which specialized in buying houses that needed work, fixing them up cheaply, and selling them for a profit. "They'll give you cash, close in 2 weeks, and you won't have to deal with any of the repair headaches," Kyle had told her. "It's perfect." I knew it wasn't perfect. I knew companies like Quick Cash Properties made their money by buying houses for 60 to 70% of their actual value, then doing minimal improvements before flipping them. Mom's house, even with all its problems, was worth at least $800,000 in the current market. After proper renovations, it could easily be worth $1.4 million. A quick cash company would probably offer her $400,000 to $500,000, and she'd think she was getting a good deal because she wouldn't have to deal with the hassle of repairs. On November 22nd, the day before Thanksgiving, I was working late in my office when I heard Mom's voice coming through the walls. She was next door at Kyle's apartment. His building shared a wall with the coffee shop below my office, and she was crying again. I stepped outside and could hear their conversation clearly through Kyle's open window. "The company looked at the house today," Mom was saying. "They're going to make an offer tomorrow." "See? I told you it would work out," Kyle said. "How much are they thinking?" $425,000, Mom said. "It's less than I hoped, but they explained that it's fair because of all the work that needs to be done." I felt sick to my stomach. $425,000 for a house that could be worth over $1 million with the right renovations. Mom would lose her family home and hundreds of thousands of dollars because she was too proud to accept help from me and too trusting to question Kyle's terrible advice. "You should take it," Kyle said. "It's better than dealing with contractors and permits and all that stress. Besides, you'll have enough money to buy a nice condo somewhere." "It just breaks my heart," Mom said. 3 generations of our family have lived in that house. But I guess I don't have a choice." Standing there on the sidewalk, listening to my mother resign herself to losing her most precious possession for a fraction of its value, I made a decision. If Mom was determined to sell the house, and if she wouldn't let me help her save it as a rental property, then I was going to make sure she at least got what it was worth. I was going to buy it myself. I pulled out my phone and called my business attorney, David Kim, even though it was nearly 9 p.m. "David, I need to put together a cash offer on a property by tomorrow morning," I said. "How quickly can we make this happen?" "Tomorrow's Thanksgiving, Emma," he said. "What's the rush?" "Family emergency," I said, which wasn't exactly a lie. If I don't act fast, my mother is about to make the worst financial decision of her life. I spent the rest of the evening researching comparable properties, calculating renovation costs, and putting together a fair market offer. Not a lowball offer like the flipping company would make, but an actual fair price that reflected the house's true value. The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, I had David submit an offer of $950,000 for 1247 Maple Street. It was more than twice what Quick Cash Properties was offering, and it was enough to give Mom financial security for the rest of her life. I drove to Kyle's apartment that afternoon with 2 things, a bottle of expensive wine for dinner and a signed purchase agreement in my briefcase. I had no idea that by the end of the day, I'd be sitting in my car outside that house, listening to Mom scream that I was a complete failure, knowing that I'd just bought the one thing she loved more than anything else in the world. But maybe that's exactly what she needed to finally understand the difference between helping someone and enabling them. Thanksgiving Day, November 23rd, 2023. I pulled into the parking lot of Kyle's apartment complex at exactly 2:30 p.m., the expensive bottle of Pinot Noir I'd brought sitting in the passenger seat next to a bag of gourmet side dishes from Whole Foods. I'd spent $180 on food for a dinner that would probably cost Kyle about $30 to make, but that was just how these family gatherings went. I brought the expensive stuff, and everyone pretended not to notice the price tags while simultaneously resenting me for being able to afford them. I was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater that I'd bought at Nordstrom the week before. It cost $340, which was probably more than Kyle made in a week, but I'd chosen it specifically because it was elegant without being flashy. I'd learned over the years to walk a careful line between looking successful enough that no one could accuse me of being fake, but not so successful that I'd be accused of showing off. Kyle's apartment was on the 2nd floor of a complex that had been built in the 1980s and hadn't been updated since. The carpets were brown, the kitchen appliances were harvest gold, and the whole place smelled faintly of cigarettes even though Kyle didn't smoke. He'd been living there for 3 years, paying $1,200 a month for a 1-bedroom unit that he could barely afford. I knocked on the door and heard Kyle yell, "It's open," from inside. I walked in to find him in the kitchen, standing over a turkey that looked like it might feed 12 people even though there were only 3 of us. Mom was sitting at his small dining table, which had been extended with a card table to accommodate the oversized meal. "Hey, Emma," Kyle said, barely looking up from the turkey. "Mom's been here since noon, stressing about everything." Mom looked up from her phone and gave me a tired smile. "Hi, honey. You look nice." "Thanks," I said, setting the wine and food on the counter. "How are you holding up?" The question was a mistake. Mom's face immediately crumpled, and I could see she was about to start crying again. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she said, her voice shaking. "The insurance company is completely useless. They're saying the electrical fire was caused by deferred maintenance, so they won't cover any of the repairs. And now the city inspector is talking about condemning the whole property if I don't bring everything up to code." I sat down across from her at the table. "Mom, I've told you multiple times, I can help with this. I know contractors who specialize in historic properties. I understand the permit process. I can get this handled properly." She shook her head immediately. "I don't need help from someone who thinks money solves everything." "Money doesn't solve everything," I said carefully, "but it does solve problems like electrical systems and roof repairs. And I have money and you need repairs. It's not complicated." Kyle turned around from the stove, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Actually, Mom, I've got some good news about that." Mom looked up hopefully. "Really?" I talked to my buddy Derek again, and he connected me with this company called Quick Cash Properties. They specialize in buying houses that need work. They'll take the house as is, give you cash, and close in 2 weeks. No repairs, no inspections, no hassle. I felt my stomach drop. "Kyle, those companies are..." "They came out and looked at the house yesterday," Kyle continued, ignoring my interruption. "They're going to make an offer tomorrow, but Derek thinks it'll be around $425,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $425,000. For a house that was worth at least $800,000 even in its current condition, and could easily be worth $1.4 million with proper renovations." "Kyle," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "that's less than half what the house is worth. Even with all the repairs it needs, Mom would make more money fixing it up." "Not everyone can throw money around like you do," Mom said sharply. "I'm not throwing money around," I said, feeling my patience starting to fray. "I'm trying to save you from losing hundreds of thousands of dollars." Mom stood up from the table, her face flushing red. "There you go again, acting like you know better than everyone else." "I do know better about this," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "It's literally my job. I've been doing this for 6 years. Kyle looked uncomfortable. "She's just trying to help, Mom." "Help?" Mom laughed bitterly. "She's trying to control everything, just like always. Just like her father." That stung. Dad had never tried to control anything. He'd been the most laid-back person I'd ever known. "How is offering to save you $500,000 controlling?" I asked. "Because you think your fancy education and your expensive car make you better than us," she shouted. I stood up now too, feeling 16 years of frustration boiling over. "That's not what this is about. This is about you making a terrible financial decision out of pride." "Pride?" She was practically screaming now. "You want to talk about pride? You've been nothing but prideful and arrogant since you got a little money." "A little money?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, I'm trying to help you keep your family home." "Stop," she screamed, loud enough that I was sure the neighbors could hear. "Just stop pretending you care about family. You're a complete failure as a daughter. All you care about is showing off how much better you think you are." The words hung in the air like smoke from the electrical fire that had started this whole mess. Kyle was staring at his plate, visibly uncomfortable. I could feel my face going completely blank as all the emotions I'd been holding back for years suddenly shut down. But Mom wasn't done. "Your father would be ashamed of what you've become," she continued, her voice shaking with rage. "Selfish, arrogant, thinking money makes you special. All you do is lord your success over us, making us feel small so you can feel big." I stood there for a moment, processing what she'd just said. My father, who had worked his entire life at a paper mill and died with $14,000 in savings, would be ashamed of me for building a multi-million-dollar business and offering to help my family. My father, who had always encouraged me to dream big and work hard, would be ashamed of me for succeeding. I walked to the coat closet and pulled out my jacket, moving with a calm that surprised even me. "You're right, Mom," I said quietly. "I am a failure. I failed to see that you'd rather lose everything than accept help from your daughter." I picked up my purse and the bottle of wine I'd brought. The expensive side dishes could stay. They'd probably go in the trash anyway. "Enjoy your $425,000, I said, walking toward the door. "I hope Kyle's friend treats you well. Don't you dare walk out on this family," Mom shouted after me. I paused with my hand on the doorknob and turned back to look at her. She was standing in Kyle's tiny living room, face red with anger, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "I'm not walking out," I said. "I'm walking toward people who actually value what I have to offer." I closed the door behind me and walked down the stairs to my car. My hands were steady, my breathing was normal, and I felt strangely calm. It wasn't until I was sitting in my Mercedes, looking up at Kyle's apartment window, that I realized what I had to do. I pulled out my phone and called David Kim. "David, it's Emma. Is that offer still valid?" "Of course," he said. "But Emma, it's Thanksgiving. Are you sure you want to?" "I'm sure," I said, looking up at the light in Kyle's window. "Submit the offer. $950,000, cash, close in 30 days. "That's going to be significantly more than any competing offer," he said. "I know," I said. "That's the point." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, complete certainty. For once in my life, I wasn't going to stand by and watch my family make a catastrophic mistake. If Mom thought I was a failure, if she thought I only cared about money, if she thought I used my success to make other people feel small, then I was going to show her what that actually looked like. I was going to buy her childhood home, restore it to its full glory, and prove to her once and for all that I wasn't the selfish, arrogant daughter she thought I was. I was the daughter who had enough money and enough business sense to save the thing she loved most in the world, even when she was too proud to let me help. The next morning, my offer would reach her before Quick Cash Properties even had a chance to submit theirs. And that's when the real conversation would begin. I sat in my Mercedes in Kyle's parking lot for 20 minutes after that conversation, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel. I could see the light from his apartment window, could picture Mom and Kyle sitting down to their Thanksgiving dinner, probably talking about how difficult I was, how I'd stormed out over nothing. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from something deeper. A kind of clarity I'd never felt before. For 28 years, I'd been trying to earn a place in my family, trying to prove that my success was something to be proud of rather than ashamed of. And for 28 years, it had never been enough. Sitting there in that parking lot, I realized I was done. Done apologizing for my success. Done pretending that Mom's resentment was somehow my fault. Done watching her make terrible decisions out of pride while rejecting help from the one person in her life who actually had the resources to solve her problems. The final straw wasn't just her calling me a failure. It was her willingness to lose her family's 3-generation legacy to a house-flipping company rather than accept help from me. If she wanted to see me as the villain, then maybe it was time I started acting like one. I drove home in complete silence, no music, no podcasts, just the sound of my own thoughts crystallizing into something cold and determined. By the time I pulled into my building's garage, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Thanksgiving evening, while Mom and Kyle were probably watching football and complaining about me, I was sitting at my dining room table with my laptop open, researching everything I could find about 1247 Maple Street. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Mom hadn't just been understating the financial problems, she'd been living in complete denial about them. The electrical fire wasn't just a recent problem. According to city records, there had been 3 separate citations for electrical code violations over the past 2 years. The roof repairs she'd been putting off weren't optional. The city had issued a notice of violation 18 months ago requiring them to be completed by December 2023. She had exactly 5 weeks to bring the roof up to code or face potential condemnation proceedings. The plumbing situation was even worse. The house had been cited for sewage backup problems in 2022, and the temporary fix Kyle's contractor friends had done was actually illegal according to city codes. The entire sewage line needed to be replaced, estimated cost $35,000. But the real shock came when I pulled up the property tax records. Mom was 2 years behind on property taxes, owing $17,832 in back taxes plus penalties and interest. The county had placed a lien on the property and was scheduled to begin foreclosure proceedings in January 2024. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. Mom wasn't just facing expensive repairs, she was about to lose the house to the county for unpaid taxes. The quick cash property's offer of $425,000 wouldn't even cover all her debts once the city's citations, back taxes, and liens were factored in. After everything was paid off, she'd walk away with maybe $200,000 from a house that could be worth $1.4 million. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about financial survival, and Mom either didn't understand the situation or was too overwhelmed to face it. I called David Kim at home, even though it was 9 p.m. on Thanksgiving night. "Emma, this better be an emergency," he said when he picked up. "It is," I said. "I want to make an offer on a distressed property. It's a family situation, so it needs to be handled very carefully." "How carefully are we talking?" I explained the situation, the back taxes, the city violations, the liens, and Mom's complete denial about the severity of the problems. "Your mother is in serious trouble," David said. "If she doesn't address these issues immediately, she's going to lose the house anyway. The county foreclosure will happen before any private sale can close." "That's why I want to buy it," I said. "I'll pay full market value, handle all the debts and repairs, and save the house." "Emma," David said carefully, "this sounds personal. Are you sure you're thinking about this as a business decision?" "It's both," I said. "It's good business. I'll make money on it eventually. But it's also the only way to save something that's been in my family for 3 generations." Friday morning, I had a long conversation with my therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen. I'd been seeing her for 2 years, working through family dynamics and building healthy boundaries. She'd heard plenty about Mom's treatment of me over the years. "I'm not doing this to hurt her," I explained, sitting in Dr. Chen's office overlooking the Willamette River. "I'm doing this to save something she's about to lose through stubbornness." "But you're also angry," Dr. Chen observed. "I'm furious," I admitted. "But the anger isn't driving this decision. The business reality is driving it. She's going to lose the house anyway if someone doesn't intervene. And you're the only one who can intervene?" "I'm the only one who has the money and the expertise to do it right," I said. "Kyle means well, but he's in over his head. Mom would rather lose everything than admit that I might be able to help." Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair. "What's your real goal here, Emma?" I thought about it for a long moment. "I want to preserve the house. I want to save the family history. And yes, I want to prove to her once and for all that my success isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something that can actually benefit the people I love. Even if she never appreciates it?" "Especially if she never appreciates it," I said. "Because then at least I'll know I did the right thing, regardless of how she chooses to see it." By Friday afternoon, I had the complete plan formed. I would offer $950,000 cash for the house, which was fair market value considering its condition and potential. I would pay off all liens, back taxes, and city violations as part of the purchase. I would hire the best contractors in Portland to restore the house properly, preserving every historic detail while updating all the systems to modern standards. Most importantly, I would make it clear to Mom that she could visit anytime she wanted. This wasn't about taking the house away from her, it was about preserving it for future generations. The house would become a rental property in my portfolio, but it would be a special one. I'd rent it to families who would appreciate its history and take care of it properly. I'd maintain the gardens exactly as Grandma had designed them. I'd preserve every architectural detail that made the house special. Mom would end up with $950,000 instead of $425,000, enough money to buy a beautiful condo and have substantial savings left over. She'd be financially secure for the rest of her life. And the family home would be preserved, restored, and protected forever. If that made me the villain in her story, so be it. I'd rather be the villain who saved everything than the hero who watched it all disappear because I was too polite to intervene. Saturday morning, I called David and told him to submit the offer. By Monday, this would all be in motion. Mom would finally see exactly what her failure of a daughter was capable of achieving. That morning, I was sitting in my home office by 7 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to turn my decision into reality. The first thing I needed to do was structure this properly. This couldn't look like an emotional family dispute or a vindictive daughter taking advantage of her mother. It had to be a legitimate, professional real estate transaction that could withstand any scrutiny. I called Janet Morrison, a real estate agent I'd worked with on 3 previous deals. Janet specialized in historic properties and had no connection to my family, which made her perfect for this situation. "Emma, I wasn't expecting to hear from you on Black Friday," she said when she answered. "I have a unique opportunity," I said. "There's a 1920s craftsman in Laurelhurst that's about to go on the market. I want to make a preemptive offer before it gets listed." "Interesting. Tell me about the property." I gave her the address and the basic details: electrical problems, deferred maintenance, current tenant situation. I didn't mention that the owner was my mother. "I'll need to see the property and pull comps," Janet said. "But based on what you're describing and knowing Laurelhurst values, I'd estimate it's worth $800,000 to $900,000 in current condition." "I want to offer $950,000, I said. There was a pause. "Emma, that's significantly above market value. Why would you overpay?" "Because I want to ensure my offer is accepted immediately, and because the property has sentimental value to me." Janet agreed to handle the transaction, and we set up a meeting for Sunday afternoon to review all the details. Next, I called David Kim to discuss the legal structure. "I want to make this offer through Wilson Investment Properties LLC, I said. "Everything needs to be completely above board. I don't want any appearance of taking advantage of a distressed seller." "Smart approach," David said. "Using your LLC provides professional distance and legitimacy." "But Emma, offering $950,000 for a house that's probably worth $800,000 in its current condition, that's going to raise questions." "Good questions or bad questions?" "From a legal standpoint, good questions. It shows you're not taking advantage of the seller. But from a family standpoint, let me worry about the family aspect," I said. "Just make sure everything is legally sound." David spent the weekend researching property liens, tax obligations, and code violations. The news was worse than I'd expected. The total debts against the property were $64,000, back taxes, city fines, contractor liens, and utility liens. Mom had been in denial about more than just the repair costs. "Your mother is literally weeks away from losing this house," David told me Sunday evening. "The county foreclosure is scheduled for January 15th. No legitimate buyer would touch this property without requiring her to clear all liens first, which she obviously can't do. But if I buy it and assume responsibility for the liens, then you save her house and give her a clean sale. She walks away with about $886,000 after closing costs. That's more than twice what any house flipping company would pay." Monday morning, I had my second session with Dr. Chen in 3 days. I'd never needed therapy more. "I'm struggling with my motivation here," I admitted. "Part of me is doing this to help her, but part of me wants to prove a point." "What point?" "That I'm not the selfish, arrogant daughter she thinks I am. That my success can actually benefit the people I love if they'd let it." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "Emma, you can't control how your mother interprets your actions. If you're doing this to change her opinion of you, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Then what should my motivation be? What feels right to you independent of her reaction?" I thought about it. Saving the house feels right. Preserving 3 generations of family history feels right. Making sure she doesn't lose everything because she's too proud to accept help feels right. And if she never appreciates it, then at least I'll know I did what I could with the resources I have. Dr. Chen nodded. "That's healthy motivation. You're using your success to protect something valuable, regardless of whether you get credit for it." The financial reality was straightforward. My total investment would be $1.15 million to $950,000 for the purchase, plus approximately $200,000 for renovations, closing costs, and carrying costs during the renovation period. After renovations, the house would be worth at least $1.6 million, probably closer to $1.8 million given the quality of work I plan to do. This wasn't just family preservation. It was also a solid business investment. And crucially, I could afford it without impacting any of my other investments or my personal financial security. My real estate portfolio was worth $2.3 million, and this would actually strengthen it by adding a high-value property in an appreciating neighborhood. I spent Monday evening reviewing contractors and planning the renovation approach. I'd hire Peterson and Associates, the same firm that had restored the Pittock Mansion. They specialized in historic properties and would preserve every architectural detail while updating all the systems to modern standards. The electrical work alone would cost $45,000, but it would be done right, with permits and inspections, not the half measures Kyle's friends had been suggesting. The timeline was crucial. Thanksgiving had been Thursday, November 23rd. I'd spent Friday researching and consulting with lawyers. Saturday and Sunday were for legal and financial planning. Monday, November 27th, was when everything would be submitted. The beauty of the timing was that Quick Cash Properties hadn't submitted their offer yet. According to Kyle's conversation with Mom, they were planning to submit on Monday or Tuesday. My offer would reach Mom first, giving her a real alternative before she committed to the lowball offer. Tuesday morning, Janet called me with confirmation. "Your offer has been submitted," she said. $950,000 cash, 30-day close, buyer assumes all liens and violations. Emma, this is the cleanest, strongest offer I've ever seen for a distressed property. When will the seller receive it? Her agent should have it within the hour. I hung up and sat back in my office chair, looking out at the Portland skyline. In about an hour, Mom would discover that someone was offering her more than twice what Kyle's house-flipping company had proposed. She'd probably be confused at first, maybe even suspicious. It would take her a while to realize that Wilson Investment Properties LLC was my company. And then the real conversation would begin. I'd prepared for every possible reaction. Mom might be grateful, though that seemed unlikely given our history. She might be angry, feeling like I'd gone behind her back. She might be confused about my motives. Kyle might see this as me undermining his efforts to help, or he might be relieved that the family home would be saved. What I knew for certain was that I'd done everything right. The offer was fair, the process was professional, and the outcome would preserve something precious while giving Mom financial security. If she chose to see that as manipulation or control, that was her decision to make. My phone rang at 11:47 a.m. It was Mom, and I could tell from her voice that she'd received the offer. "Emma," Mom said, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "I got a call from some real estate agent about an offer on Grandma's house." I kept my voice carefully neutral. "Oh? What kind of offer?" There was a pause, and I could hear her breathing heavily. "Don't play dumb with me," she said, her voice rising. "Wilson Investment Properties LLC. That's you, isn't it?" "Yes, Mom. That's my company." "How dare you go behind my back like this?" she screamed, loud enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "I made a legitimate business offer on a property," I said calmly. "That's what I do for a living. This is my family home. You can't just buy it." I looked up at the house, at the stained glass window in the front door that had been there since 1923, and felt a strange sense of peace. "Actually, I can." And I did. My offer was accepted this morning. The silence that followed was so complete I thought she might have hung up. Then she started screaming. "You're stealing my house. You're taking advantage of me when I'm desperate. How could you do this to your own mother?" "I offered you $950,000 cash," I said, my voice still calm. "That's $525,000 more than your friend was going to pay you." "That's not the point," she shouted. "You went behind my back. You manipulated this whole situation." I felt something cold settle in my chest. After everything, after 16 years of dismissal and criticism, after being called a failure and told my father would be ashamed of me, she was still making me the villain. "You called me a complete failure and said Dad would be ashamed of me," I said quietly. "I figured you wouldn't want a failure's help anyway." "That's not. I didn't mean." "You meant every word," I said. "And you know what? Maybe you were right. Maybe I was a failure at understanding that you'd rather lose everything than accept that I might actually be successful." I could hear her crying now, but I didn't feel the usual urge to comfort her. "Here's what's going to happen, Mom," I continued. "I'm going to restore this house properly. New roof, new electrical, new plumbing, everything Grandma would have wanted. It's going to be beautiful again. I'll fight this, she said through her tears. I'll get a lawyer. I'll claim you coerced me. You can try, I said. But you owe $47,000 in city violations, $12,000 in back taxes, and you're about to face condemnation proceedings in January. My purchase cleared all of that. Without this sale, you would have lost the house to the county anyway. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she was processing what I'd just told her. You planned this, she finally whispered. No, I said, looking at the house that would soon legally be mine. I tried to help you avoid this for months. I offered to loan you money for repairs. I offered to manage the renovations. I offered to handle the rental situation. But you'd rather call me a failure than accept that I might actually know what I'm doing. You could have told me about the back taxes, she said, her voice smaller now. When? When you were telling me I thought money solved everything. When you were saying I was just showing off. When you were explaining that Dad would be ashamed of me. She started crying harder. Emma, please. The house will be beautiful again, I said softly. You can visit anytime you want. I'm not taking your memories away. I'm preserving them. It won't be the same, she sobbed. It won't be ours. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the Mercedes leather seat. It was never going to be yours much longer anyway, Mom. At least now it stays in the family. Family, she said, her voice rising again. You destroyed this family. You destroyed everything. That's when I felt the last piece of my patience disappear. No, Mom, I said, my voice harder now. I saved what I could of it. Including you, whether you realize it or not. How did you save me? You took my house. I gave you $950,000 instead of the $200,000 you would have walked away with after Quick Cash Properties paid their lowball offer, and you covered all your debts. I saved you from losing the house to county foreclosure in 6 weeks. I saved you from bankruptcy. And I saved the house from being destroyed by some flipping company that would have torn out all the original details and turned it into a generic renovation. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her sniffling. You should have told me, she said weakly. I tried to tell you for months, I said. But every time I tried to help, you accused me of showing off or trying to control you. So I stopped trying to convince you and just did what needed to be done. What happens now? She asked. I looked at the house one more time, imagining it restored to its full glory. Now you take your $950,000 and buy yourself a beautiful condo somewhere. You invest the rest and live comfortably for the rest of your life. And I restore this house the way Grandma would have wanted, with proper contractors and historical accuracy and attention to every detail. And us? She asked quietly. That's up to you, I said. You can keep seeing me as the selfish, arrogant daughter who destroyed the family. Or you can accept that maybe, just maybe, your successful daughter used her resources to save something precious when no one else could. I hung up before she could respond and sat in my car for another 10 minutes, looking at the house. In 30 days, it would be mine. In 6 months, it would be restored. And someday, maybe Mom would understand that this wasn't revenge, it was rescue. But even if she never understood, I'd done the right thing. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. That evening, I was at home making dinner when my phone rang. Kyle's name appeared on the screen, and I debated whether to answer. I knew this conversation was coming, but I wasn't sure I was ready for it. Emma, he said when I picked up, his voice tight with frustration. What the hell did you do? I bought a house, I said simply. It's what I do for a living. Don't give me that corporate bullshit, he snapped. Mom's been crying all day. She says you stole Grandma's house. I set down my wine glass and moved to the living room window, looking out at the city lights. Did she tell you what Quick Cash Properties was going to pay her? For 25. So what? That's still a lot of money. Kyle, do you know what Mom owes in back taxes and city violations? There was a pause. What do you mean? She's $17,000 behind on property taxes. The city has $47,000 in liens against the property for code violations. She owes money to contractors who did work last year. The total debt against that house is over $64,000. That can't be right, Kyle said, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. After Quick Cash Properties paid her $425,000 and she covered all her debts, she would have walked away with maybe $200,000. Kyle, the county was going to foreclose on the house in January. She would have lost everything. The silence stretched long enough that I thought he might have hung up. She never told me any of that, he said quietly. She never told me either. I had to research it myself. Mom's been living in denial about how bad the financial situation really was. So what happens now, he asked. Now she gets $950,000. After paying off all the debts, she'll clear about $886,000. That's more money than she's ever had in her life, Kyle. She can buy a beautiful condo and still have $500,000 in savings. But the house will be restored properly. Historic renovation, not some cheap flip job. It'll be rented to families who appreciate its history. And Mom can visit anytime she wants. Kyle was quiet for a long moment. I didn't know, he finally said. About the taxes and the liens and all that. I thought we were helping. You were trying to help, I said. But sometimes good intentions aren't enough. Sometimes you need resources and expertise. She's going to hate you for this, he said. She already hated me for being successful, I replied. At least now I used that success to save something important. The next morning, I was leaving for work when Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door to the Maple Street house, called me. She was 73 years old and had been neighbors with my grandmother for 40 years. Emma, dear, she said, I heard about the house. I just wanted you to know that your grandmother would be so proud of you for saving it. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That means a lot. I've been watching that poor house deteriorate for years, she continued. Your mother means well, but she was in over her head. What you did, it was the right thing. The house deserves to be beautiful again. Over the next few days, I heard from several other neighbors who'd known my family for decades. The response was overwhelmingly positive. They'd all watched Mom struggle with the property maintenance, and they understood that I'd stepped in to preserve something valuable. The professional response was even more validating. Janet Morrison, my real estate agent, called Wednesday morning with congratulations. Emma, I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've never seen such a clean, ethical transaction involving a distressed property, she said. You paid above market value, assumed all the debts, and you're planning a proper restoration. This is how these deals should work. Marcus William, my business partner on several previous investments, called that afternoon. I heard about the Laurel Hist acquisition, he said. Brilliant move. That neighborhood is only going to appreciate, and a proper restoration of a 1920s craftsman will be worth a fortune. Plus, the story is incredible from a marketing standpoint. Marketing standpoint? I asked. Think about it. Successful local businesswoman saves family's historic home through ethical real estate investment. The Portland Business Journal is going to love this story. He was right. By Friday, I'd received calls from 2 local reporters interested in covering the historic home restoration angle. The story they wanted to tell wasn't about family drama. It was about responsible real estate investment and historic preservation. The Portland Business Journal ran a feature the following week titled, Preserving Portland's Past, How Local Investors Can Save Historic Properties. My photo was on the cover, standing in front of 1247 Maple Street, with a caption that read, Emma Wilson demonstrates how real estate investment can preserve community heritage while providing fair returns to sellers. The article detailed the challenges facing owners of historic properties, the high costs of proper restoration, the complexity of city codes and permitting, the difficulty of finding qualified contractors. It positioned my purchase as a model for how investors could work ethically with distressed sellers while preserving architectural heritage. Wilson's approach shows that profitable real estate investment doesn't have to come at the expense of community values, the article concluded. By paying above market value and committing to historic restoration standards, she's created a win-win scenario that other investors would do well to emulate. The publicity was incredible for my business. I received inquiries from 3 new clients within a week of the article's publication. 2 were families with historic properties they couldn't afford to maintain properly, and 1 was a nonprofit looking for investor partners in historic preservation projects. Meanwhile, David Kim had arranged for Mom to meet with Sarah Williams, a financial advisor who specialized in helping people manage sudden wealth. Sarah would help Mom invest her money properly, set up a budget for her new lifestyle, and make sure she was financially secure for the rest of her life. "Your mother is going to be fine," David told me after Sarah's first meeting with Mom. "More than fine, actually. If she invests conservatively, she'll have enough income to live very comfortably without ever touching the principal." Rebecca could afford a $400,000 condo in a nice area and still have $480,000 invested for retirement income. At a conservative 4% annual return, that would give her an additional $19,200 per year on top of her work pension. She'd gone from struggling to pay for roof repairs to having more financial security than she'd ever dreamed of. But the best vindication came from an unexpected source. Thursday afternoon, I received a call from Helen Morrison, the president of the Laurelhurst Neighborhood Association. "Ms. Wilson," she said, "I wanted to personally thank you for what you're doing with the Maple Street property. We've been watching that house deteriorate for years, and we were heartbroken at the thought of it being sold to a house flipping company." "It's a beautiful house," I said. "It deserves to be restored properly. We understand you're planning to use Peterson and Associates for the restoration work?" "That's right. They did the Pittock Mansion restoration." "Excellent choice. We'd like to feature your project in our newsletter as an example of responsible investment in historic properties. Would you be willing to participate in our spring home tour once the restoration is complete?" I agreed, realizing that what Mom saw as betrayal, the community saw as preservation. What she viewed as me taking something away, everyone else understood as me saving something precious. That evening, I sat in my condo looking out at the city lights, reflecting on the week's events. My phone had been buzzing with congratulations from colleagues, praise from neighbors, and business inquiries from potential clients. My reputation had been enhanced, not damaged, by the transaction. But Mom still wasn't speaking to me, and Kyle was caught in the middle, trying to understand how something that seemed so wrong to our family could be viewed so positively by everyone else. The truth was starting to become clear. Sometimes being the villain in someone else's story is the price you pay for being the hero in the larger narrative. And sometimes, saving someone requires them to see you as the enemy, at least temporarily. The question was whether Mom would ever understand that I'd saved her, not betrayed her. And, honestly, I was starting to accept that she might not. That was okay. I'd done the right thing, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. 6 months later, in May 2024, 1247, Maple Street was completely transformed. Peterson and Associates had restored it to stunning 1920s glory. New roof, electrical, and plumbing, all hidden behind perfectly preserved original details. Portland Monthly featured it as a masterclass in historic preservation, and the property was now worth $1.72 million. I'd rented it to Mark and Jennifer Mitchell, a young couple with children who appreciated its history and promised to maintain the gardens exactly as I'd restored them. Mom's life had changed just as dramatically. She'd bought a beautiful $350,000 condo in Beaverton and invested her remaining $520,000 in conservative accounts, generating $21,000 yearly income. For the first time since Dad died, she wasn't stressed about money. But the emotional healing took months. Kyle served as our go-between, calling weekly with updates. "She's doing better," he'd say. "The new place is nice, but she still gets upset when people ask about the house." The breakthrough came in March when Kyle convinced Mom to drive by the restored house. "She cried for 20 minutes, he told me. Good crying. She kept saying it looked exactly like when Grandma was alive, but better. She wants to see it properly." 2 weeks later, I met them at the house. Mom looked healthier than I'd seen her in years, rested, less fragile, the constant stress lines around her eyes softened. I led them through slowly, explaining every restoration choice. In the living room, I'd hung family photos, including Grandma's portrait above the fireplace. Mom stopped in front of that portrait and started crying. "It's exactly what she would have wanted," she said softly. "You preserved everything that mattered." She turned to me, tears flowing. "I'm sorry, Emma. I'm so sorry for everything," I said. It was the first genuine apology I'd ever received from her. Over the following months, our relationship rebuilt on a different foundation. Mom called weekly with good news, asking for advice instead of offering criticism. She started telling friends about her successful businesswoman daughter instead of the one getting too big for her britches. My business exploded after the Portland Monthly article. I was managing $15 million in assets by year-end and speaking at real estate conferences. The Maple Street restoration became my signature project. Easter dinner 2024 was our first family gathering since that Thanksgiving. Mom brought expensive wine and spent the evening asking about my work instead of criticizing my choices. "I owe you an explanation," she said after dinner. "I called you a failure because I was afraid you'd outgrow us. That your success was a judgment on my failures after your father died." She paused, looking out the window. "But you never outgrew us. Even when I pushed you away, you still saved what mattered most to me." "The house mattered to me too," I said. "It was our family's history." Before leaving, I gave her the original brass key to 1247 Maple Street. "I had copies made for the new locks," I explained. "But I thought you should keep this one." She held the key, tears in her eyes. "Thank you. For saving the house, for saving me from losing everything, and for not giving up on our family." A month later, she called to say she'd hung the key next to Grandma's photo in her new condo. "Every time I look at it," she said, "I remember that the house is safe forever now. Just like you made sure I am." "That was always the point, Mom. I'm sorry I couldn't see that you were trying to save us all along." Looking back, what happened wasn't really revenge, it was rescue. Messy, complicated, and misunderstood in the moment, but ultimately an act of love. Sometimes saving someone requires them to see you as the villain temporarily. Sometimes preserving a family means making business decisions that feel cold. And sometimes the difference between revenge and rescue isn't clear until the dust settles. I'd rather be the daughter who saved everything than the one who watched it all disappear because I was too polite to act. And finally, after 28 years, my mother understood that too. I learned that sometimes being called a failure by people who should support you is really just their fear of your success. My mother's criticism wasn't about me. It was about her own insecurities and fear that I'd outgrow our family. Have you ever had family members try to tear you down when you were building yourself up? Maybe they called your dreams unrealistic or said you were getting too big for your britches. What did you do and how did you handle it? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if my story of turning family criticism into family preservation inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge with Nick for more stories about proving the doubters wrong and protecting what matters most. Remember, sometimes the best revenge against being called a failure is becoming so successful that you can save the people who tried to tear you down, whether they appreciate it or not. Success isn't just about proving them wrong. It's about having the resources to help them even when they can't see that's what you're doing. Thank you for listening to my story.